Bill O'Reilly laid out his plan to fight ISIS last night on his show, and it's the worst idea possible. Let's listen.
First of all, there is not a single credible military person who thinks the ISIS terror group can be defeated without ground forces. So, we need ground forces. However, the American people, perhaps rightly so, don't want to send any more of our troops into these chaotic countries. But what about a mercenary army? Elite fighters who would be well paid, well trained to defeat terrorists all over the world. Here's how it would work. The fighters would be recruited by America and trained in the USA by our special forces. U.S. Army rules of engagement would be followed. Strict discipline formed by the Geneva Convention. America would be in charge of selecting who makes the cut and how they are deployed, with an eye on a 25,000-person force. American and NATO officers would lead the mercenary army, and the USA would also provide logistical support, basing the first trained soldiers in Kurdistan. The force would be called the Anti-Terror Army, and the cost paid by the coalition that President Obama is trying to put together. That means all countries that want intelligence and protection from the USA and NATO would have to chip in. If they don't pay, they get no help. The elite force would be English-speaking, and because paychecks would be issued, soldiers currently in armed forces around the world would not be eligible. Only American and NATO officers in command would be exempt from that. Each soldier would sign a contract, a 3-year commitment, and again, they would be highly paid.
You know what he's describing, right? That's Blackwater. That's Blackwater all day long. Or should I say Z? Because Blackwater, of course, changed their name because they had so many scandals. It went from Blackwater to Z to Academy, I think. And they probably, I don't know, they may have changed it 412 times since the last time I checked. But that's what he's advocating for. His answer is to fight ISIS for profit. Oh. Because that worked so brilliantly in Iraq. Right, Bill? The biggest fuck-up that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's widely understood and accepted that it was doing private security forces like Blackwater and others, because what did they end up doing? They just violated international law, and they violated the military code of justice, and they were able to do it with impunity. Why? Because they're not part of the military, so they're not governed by the same process. Now, to be fair to Bill O'Reilly, he did throw in there in the middle of the rant that they should abide by the Geneva Convention, so at least he's trying to find some sort of legal context and framework for them to function within. But, empirically speaking, the, private military groups, they don't fall under international law. That only governs states, nation states. And again, if you do something like that, it's going to end up being for profit. Do you really want to set up such an insanely perverse incentive for a system like that, where you're telling people, oh, killing people and being barbaric and savage, that's going to be for money now. That's a thing now. So if you want to get together a private army and then we'll just send you around the world to do all this killing, totally awesome, rad, go for it. Now imagine for a second if other countries did that. Imagine if Iran got together a private army and just sent it out wherever for their own purposes. Any country, it doesn't have to be Iran, it doesn't have to be somebody who's our enemy. But fuck, imagine if Greenland did that. All of a sudden, we'd be talking about how Greenland is acting a little fucking crazy, aren't they? Calm down, guys. By the way, do you know what mercenary armies or private armies are referred to when we don't like the people doing it? Warlord groups. You have one warlord, the head of the private army, and then everybody else underneath him. So when other people do it, oh, crazy warlords, insane, these guys aren't civilized, they don't even do it through a state they're fighting, they have little warlord groups. But when it's us, it's just a private army. That's all it is. It's amazing, our double standard. You want to know where they have a system like this, where it's just like, okay, send around for-profit troops. You want to know where they do this? Somalia, where there's no centralized government, no stability, and you have different warlord factions duking it out 24/7. But Bill O'Reilly wants to open the door to do this to fight ISIS. Now, here's the thing. This is why it's so nefarious. Because ISIS is fucked up, and they are bad, and they are terrorists. So people will, stop thinking logically and thinking like a chess game a few steps down the road, and they'll just close their eyes and go, whatever, I'm scared, so send them, that's fine. But again, think of the precedent you set. What's to stop us? If we're going to use for-profit armies to fight ISIS, what would stop us from using it to fight Boko Haram? What would stop us from using it to fight al-Nusra Front, or al-Shabaab, or Ansar al-Sharia, or the Taliban? What would stop us from using it to fight anybody who we automatically deem as an enemy? Nothing, right? So we would set up a system where not only does the U.S. go around the world toppling, governments and putting in dictators and whatnot via the CIA, which is the government and the state, now we'll have it with private warlord factions. And what happens if one of these warlords goes rogue and they say, fuck, I'm not going to work for the U.S. government anymore. I'm a private company, bitch. So guess what? If the French want to pay me instead of the Americans paying me, I'll go work for the French. Look at the doors you're opening up, and he doesn't even realize it because he's not a deep thinker. He's not a deep thinker. And here's another really important point about this. He acts like, and he says it there, well, what do we need to defeat ISIS? We need ground troops to defeat ISIS. So let's use ground troops, but private ground troops. You can't defeat ISIS. You're not going to defeat ISIS any more or less than you defeated the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. You hit them in one area and they pop up in another area in the Middle East. That's the way this works. Why? Because terrorism in this respect is a lot like murder, is a lot like robbery. It's a tactic. It's not a singular group. It's not a nation state like the Nazis where you can, if you defeat the Nazis' navy and air force and military, you defeated them. You can't do that with terrorism because if it's not ISIS, the next time it'll be Boko Haram. The next time it'll be Ansar al-Sharia. The next time it'll be a random group in Indonesia that's just getting started right now. So you can't defeat an ideology. It's just a matter of containment. How do you make it so that they do as little damage as possible, and how do you make it so that we are less of a target? And honestly, the way to do that is maybe there's a small case to be made for every once in a while you do special forces, every once in a while you do targeted, limited drone strikes through the UN and NATO and with constitutional approval, because that's how you go through due process. But outside of that, we should really mind our business unless there's an imminent threat of attack against the United States. Because then we would be the ones opting for the first strike, which is the Bush Doctrine, and that opens us up to more terrorism as we learned in the past, which is a fact that goes directly over the head of a guy like Bill O'Reilly.